For this last Sunday on the theme of courage, I wanted to talk some about how we might find the courage to take action to make a difference in the world. Now, one strategy for that we Unitarian Universalists are very familiar with, perhaps too familiar, is to start with our head. By learning about a topic and then connecting those facts with our values, we begin to see a few actions that are possible, maybe even a whole course of action. For me, this pathway is the motivation that shapes my efforts toward greener living, my eating habits and those little daily choices. One of the reasons it's difficult to motivate the big habit changes that we need to stop global warming is that we can't fully see the tragic impacts yet. But we do have mountains of information and data that point to the fact that we are in trouble. It's the combination of that data and my love for the earth that motivate my modest efforts to embrace greener living. So that's one place to start, is with the head. Another pathway, you might say, is through the heart. Sometimes we see a problem or something beautiful in the world, and our heart jolts us into action. In our Welcoming Neighbors Home work to end homelessness, I personally have been sniffing around some Orange County organizations trying to find a structured way to help particularly LGBTQ homeless youth. For all sorts of reasons, the homelessness rate around LGBTQ youth is way out of proportion. It's not that I don't care about homelessness in general, but I know that that particular angle of the issue ignites something in me. And that strategy of focusing on a personal issue used to seem a little shallow to me. But I don't think it's selfish anymore to focus on an issue that gets you fired up. There are innumerable problems that we can be working to improve, and a whole bunch of good people doing good work. So why not focus on something that really excites your passion in a way that energizes and sustains you? You might ask yourself, what is that thing that ignites your heart into motivation? So we can be moved to boldness from the head, we can be moved from the heart. This week I want to invite you to consider action itself as a starting point. Rather than focusing so much on thinking through the issue or connecting to the heart, what if we focus on taking the good action that's in front of us as often as we can? Sometimes right action can lead us into clearer thinking and feeling. UUs are loath to admit this, but religion is as much a practice as it is what we believe. The main inspiration for my sermon this week was reminding myself again, as I have several times over the past 12 years, that meditation is something that just works for me. Does that mean that I'm a Buddhist or Hindu? No. It just means that having the practice helps me feel better and be better. When I meditate regularly, I'm a better friend, a better partner, a better minister. When I meditate regularly, I am more patient, even if that's a marginal increase. And I readily find more compassion in my heart. It's the action and the results that lead the way, not my intellect or my heart in that practice. Many, maybe most people, participate in religious community for the action as much as the beliefs. We notice that the action of being together, the routine of Sunday morning, the joy of making music, the volunteering to teach our children, all these actions help ground us. It's as much about what we do as it is about what we believe, and that's not a bad thing. Some of you probably remember I know my peers do in particular. In the 1990s, an explosion of the acronym WWJD on t-shirts and bracelets and just about anything you could sell to make a buck. And what do those letters stand for? Oh, wow. Okay. You're more familiar than I thought. The campaign was hugely popular in my life as a teenager in Oklahoma. It was so big in evangelical Christianity. Most of us only know it from the t-shirts and the bumper stickers, but it actually comes from a much older source. In 1896, Charles Sheldon wrote the wildly popular book In His Steps. It sold 50 million copies, making it one of the most popular books of all time. In His Steps is a short novel that describes a transformational, year-long experience of a church. In the opening scenes, the minister, Henry Maxwell, is in his study writing his sermon, I guess, however you wrote in those days. And he's interrupted by a stranger who wanders in looking for work. And the minister is kind, but he eventually turns the man away without providing any real help. When Sunday rolls around, that same man comes and interrupts the congregation's worship service. In the middle of the sermon, he interrupts and challenges the congregation to reflect on whether or not they're living up to the ideals of their professed faith. During the same week, the stranger dies in Reverend Maxwell's home. And the following Sunday, he steps into the pulpit and issues a challenge to his congregation. He invites them to pledge to live 1 year asking the single question before they took any action: what would Jesus do? From that moment, everyone's life dramatically changes. And the book is very much a product of its time, but still the examples are clear. There's one character, Rachel. She turns down a chance to be basically an opera star, to stay in her hometown and help the local music scene there. Another character, Virginia, decides to use her massive inheritance to invest in local business ventures to create jobs for those who need them. The editor of the newspaper, this one rings so true right now. The editor of the newspaper decided not to cover an upcoming prize fight because it was too violent, and ends up losing some subscribers over that choice. Another has a more personal transformation and reconnects with his friends from his past. But the transformations don't just stop with the individuals, it actually shifts the whole town. It shapes a local election for sort of the poor neighborhood that pries local leadership out of the grips of the liquor interests. Again, this is kind of a product of its time. And the congregation has success creating a school that teaches women skills to gain self-sufficiency and to climb out of poverty. In the closing pages of the book, the nearest big city in Chicago finds these stories and invites the minister and these congregants to come share their news, I guess to testify would be the word, about their successes. It's all about doing the next good thing, not getting the theology exactly right. For decades, liberation theologians have been arguing that if we would focus more on action rather than belief, we'd be much more successful in building the world we dream about. Gustavo Gutierrez actually came up with the idea or the word of orthopraxy rather than orthodoxy. He talked about right action rather than right belief. The relationship between those, belief and action, isn't so much that one is more important than the other, so much as there's a cycle that happens between them. Those liberation theologians point out that first we can start with diving into action, And through that action, through seeing our world and the people affected in it, we can come into clearer understanding about what's sacred, and then dive back into the action. You might say, first, work for justice, then consider how that work influences our faith, and then go back and work some more. The other day, I was in a conversation. I can't even remember what the conversation was, but the name Bryan Stevenson came up. Several Tapestry members have read his book or heard him speak. He's the founder and executive director of Equal Justice Initiative. It's a nonprofit that organized to focus on fighting poverty and challenging racism and to reform the criminal justice system. The real bread and butter of their work, which is a massive mission, is defending inmates on death row. And they've had jaw-dropping success getting people who were sentenced to death exonerated. In his TED Talk, Stevenson talks about this incredible, joyful story when he got to listen to a conversation between Miss Rosa Parks and some of her peers. He was just there to listen. He was very clear about that. And he did listen for a long time. Then Miss Parks leaned forward and asked Bryan why he was there. And he eagerly explained that his organization and its agenda to end poverty in the black community, to repair the criminal justice system, end the war on drugs, confront racial disparities and sentencing and the death penalty. To which Miss Rosa Parks said, that will make you tired, tired, tired. After a long pause, one of her peers then turned to Bryan and said, and that is why you have to be brave, brave, brave. I heard that story and my eyes filled with tears the first time. It's so deeply humbling to meet the people who have changed your world with their courageous love. Those of us who have benefited, who have been the beneficiaries of justice movements and had the pleasure of learning from those stalwarts that made our lives possible, know what a gift it is to have that wisdom passed down. In his speaking and his writing, Bryan Stevenson has a tremendous trick for moving his audience from learning about the details of his story into the territory of considering how they will act in the world themselves. And through his stories, he delivers a very important note about orthopraxy. In his story, he explains that he basically stumbled into this work of helping people on death row. And through working with them and getting to know them, he came to understand the justice system and his own life in ways that the best education in America could not provide him. Stevenson talks a lot about getting close enough to people to understand them personally, to understand their challenges. The word he uses is proximity. He says that in order to be a part of the solution to the world's problems, we must start by getting closer to the people who are most impacted. Only then, when we've known the impacts on a very personal level, can we draw any conclusion about the broader framework of what is going on. It's a cycle of action and reflection and more action. So where does this leave us as Unitarian Universalists if we want to put our faith into action on a daily basis? asking what would Jesus do may be a good place for some of us to start. It's not the only way of asking the question, though. What if we focused on taking the step toward the good, choosing compassion at every opportunity where it showed up? It's a tall order. But that type of action is infinitely more important than having the right answer. In one of the most famous passages of Jewish scripture in Micah 6:8, we hear the pleading question, "What does the Lord require of you?" And the answer couldn't be more direct: to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. In the Christian tradition, when followers of Jesus were wondering about these complex, really ridiculous rules that were impossible, he offers two simple commandments. First, love your Lord with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. And second, love your neighbor as yourself. This stuff is simple. So for me, that translates to something like recognize the goodness that is real and present in the world and love your neighbor as yourself. Your translation may be slightly different, but keep it simple and let it focus on action. My deepest hope is that we may be people of action, not just people of thoughts and prayers. Amen.